What if I told you that Ferrari is no longer chasing McLaren or Red Bull, but that he has finally found a secret weapon that could change his destination in 2025? What did Hamilton and Leclerc discover in Mugello that made them talk about turning point? The SF-25, although technically an evolution of the SF-24 that had returned competitiveness in 2024, proved to be a car with irregular and demanding behavior. The first alert signals appeared in Australia, where neither Hamilton nor Leclerc managed to be in rhythm of the McLaren or Red Bull, being out of podium positions. The car suffered particularly in key phases: curve entrance with rear axle instability, difficulties in maintaining tire temperature in mixed conditions, and an operational window of height with respect to extremely narrow soil. In essence, a car that demanded millimeter perfection in tuning and, even so, did not guarantee competitiveness. Beyond the results, the biggest problem was conceptual. Ferrari had two pilots capable of maximizing a competitive car, but the SF-25 simply was not up to par. Telemetry data showed unpredictable oscillations between batches, which indicated structural problems in the consistency of the chassis under different levels of load and type of compound. Scuderia itself recognized internally that the car behaved differently between sessions, even with identical configurations. It was evident that something had to change, and that something could not wait for the next great update scheduled for mid-season. Ferrari needed to validate disruptive technical solutions, not minor adjustments. It was then that the team decided to execute a play that apparently might seem lower, but that hides a deep strategic value. Take advantage of its last filming day allowed by regulation to make it an undercover technical test session. The chosen place was no accident. Mugello, a circuit owned by Ferrari, technical, fast, and with characteristics that punish each weakness of the chassis. If a car survives Mugello with good rhythm and consistency, it can work on any other calendar layout. There, in the intimacy of Tuscany, the real reconstruction work began. Not only with new pieces but with a new attitude. What happened in Mugello was not a simple technical test. It was an undercover surgical operation, an attempt to correct in just one day what 3 races and weeks of data had demonstrated as structural failures of the SF-25. Ferrari disguised the event as a filming day, the second and last allowed by regulation FIA throughout the season. But behind the cameras, what was prepared was a comprehensive evaluation of a new concept of rear suspension, developed at all stealth by the technical area led by Loic Serra, one of the most influential additions of the team in recent years. During those hours in Mugello, Ferrari not only put a set of new pieces on track. What he really did undergo the car to a change of philosophy on the rear axle. The anchor point of the upper triangle of the suspension was relocated below, connecting differently with the gearbox housing. This single modification already implies a total reconfiguration of the dynamic behavior of the car. By lowering that connection point, the anti-quad effect is increased, an essential property to stabilize the car during traction and braking phases. In other words, the SF-25 becomes less prone to destabilize when the pilot steps on the accelerator at the exit of the curves or brakes aggressively at the end of a line. But it's not just that. The gearbox housing was also redesigned with lighter materials and a more compact size, allowing free space in the internal environment of the suspension. This maneuver enables a more efficient geometry for the control of the height with respect to the soil, a vital aspect under the current soil effect regulations. The SF-25 had been criticized for having a very small operational window, which forced an extremely precise setup to avoid aerodynamic rebounds or loss of load in rapid curves. With these modifications, Ferrari sought to make that range more flexible, giving its pilots more maneuvering margin in the car settings. The way in which the test day was also divided, it also says a lot about the team's intention. Charles Leclerc rolled in the morning with a series of short and medium batches, focused on evaluating the car's response under light and medium load. In the afternoon, Hamilton took the steering wheel for longer sessions, simulating race conditions, fuel loading and alternation changes between high and low speed curves. Both completed exactly 19 laps, a surgical balance to ensure a direct comparison without time biases on track or variable conditions. What they felt was revealing. According to internal sources and analysts such as Matteo Bobby, the pilots noticed an immediate difference in the way the car behaved over the pianos, stopping from high speed or by applying power in medium traction. Bobby summed it up in a phrase: the SF-25 has gained flexibility. Technically, this means that the car is no longer limited to working well in a narrow high range in load. It can now operate stable even when conditions change from one session to another. Those small adjustments open a huge window of possibilities in the current Formula One. They allow to adapt the car better to each circuit, to each tire compound at each asphalt temperature. And that, beyond simple gross performance, is what separates the champions from the rest. For the first time in the season, Hamilton felt freely to pilot without worrying that the car would betray it. He expressed it clearly in his subsequent debrief. The SF-25 now allows me to look for the limit without fear of disappearing suddenly. Leclerc, on the other hand, valued the way in which the rear axle maintained the composure in the rapid sequences of Mugello curves, one of the great Achilles heels of the car until then. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc reactions after the secret test in Mugello were not simple protocol statements. They reflected a paradigm shift within Ferrari, one that could mark the beginning of a deep transformation, not only in the technical behavior of the SF-25, but in the moral of its two-star pilots. Leclerc was the first to get out of the car that morning. He had driven it for almost 20 laps in a circuit that does not forgive, where any irregularity of the chassis or suspension failure is exposed. And although it was not an official test with an open stopwatch, engineers measured each microdetail. Curve entries, aerodynamic load times in each sector, brake response, vibration absorption. For the first time in weeks, I had no complaints or doubts. He confirmed that the rear of the car, formerly nervous and treacherous, now offered a level of stability that allowed him to push with confidence. His words were moderate but significant. He is not revolutionary from the outside, but inside the car, he feels everything. But in Mugello things changed. From his first laps, he began to modify his approach, braking later, softer transitions, more aggressive traces. It was there that the essential was seen. The new suspension package not only solved a structural problem, but also returned to the pilot the possibility of molding the car in his style, not vice versa. Hamilton, who rarely gets carried away by emotion in public, did not hesitate to recognize the change. He said it was the first time since his arrival in Maranello in which he felt that the car was beginning to respond as it should. He stressed that it was not only a matter of times back, but of sensations. To be able to bring the car to the limit without having to drive with fear. He explained that the key difference was how the car maintained balance in the transition between braking and acceleration, especially in medium-speed curves, where it previously suffered systematically. The most revealing thing was what both pilots agreed to highlight: the operational window of the SF-25, which until that moment had been ridiculously narrow, now felt much broader. In simpler words, there was no need to align perfect conditions for the car to work well. Now they could better adapt to different tracks, temperatures, and configurations, which opens completely new tactical possibilities in a championship as tight as that of 2025. In the paddock, Ferrari engineers also noticed another important detail. Both Hamilton and Leclerc began to ask for more batches, more adjustments, more comparative. That is a clear sign in any F1 team. The pilots are no longer frustrated, they are motivated. They want to explore, experiment, understand how far the car can go. That technical hunger is the one that distinguishes the growing equipment from those who are trapped in a stagnation cycle. Ferrari left Mugello not with absolute certainties, but with something much more valuable at this stage of the season: direction and conviction. It was not about having 1/10 in the stopwatch. It was something deeper. They had reconnected the car with their pilots. They had eliminated that invisible distrust layer that separated the cockpit from performance. In an era where confidence and feeling of control is everything, that can make the difference between a mediocre season and one of redemption. Ferrari left Mugello with something more than technical data. It was not another aerodynamic improvement. It was not a miraculous piece or an isolated solution. It was a set of technical, strategic, and human decisions that, when combined, gave rise to a sensation that had been missing in Maranello: direction. This clandestine test disguised as filming served as a catalyst for a change of narrative within the team. After years reacting to the performance of others, to pursue concepts without conviction or copy solutions without understanding its origin, Ferrari now seems to have found a line of its own evolution. A technical philosophy that, although it does not guarantee immediate victories, does build a solid basis for continuous development. In this context, Red Rebirth is not a punctual event. It is not an isolated podium or an unexpected pole. It is a process, a slow but sustained return to real competitiveness. And that process begins by recovering the link between the car and its pilots, for returning the power to mold the car in their own way, for allowing them to push the limit without fear that the car will break under their hands. That is exactly what happened in Mugello. For the first time in this new era, Hamilton and Leclerc could attack each curve without fear that the SF-25 react erratically. And that changes everything. Ferrari knows that there is still much to do. The rivals are still strong, structural weaknesses have not completely disappeared and the fight for the title will not be resolved with a single evolution. But what Mugello revealed was that Ferrari is no longer trapped. It has a clear route, has pilots convinced of the course, and above all, it has tools that work.